Dragon Ball Mythbusters is the series where I debunk tons of misinformation that has been in the fandom, in many cases for over 2 decades. And some of these are so big that a huge chunk of the fandom believes them, and thus they get spread around like fact when they are in fact not true. And I think if I were to narrow it down to just 2 that I see pop up over and over and over and over again in the fandom, is one that I already debunked, which is the idea that Toriyama was going to make Gohan the main character, but the fans forced him to go back to Goku. I already debunked that, and you can check out that video. I'll leave a link to that. And the other one is Bulma's last name. Bulma's last name is not Briefs or Brief. I have been talking about this for so many years on social media that there's people out there who actually have Mandela affected themselves into thinking I already made this video, which I do think is kind of funny. But now here is the video where not only am I going to explain the entire thing about Bulma's last name not being Briefs, but I'm going to give you a rundown of which characters in Dragon Ball actually have last names, and finally destroy this myth once and for all, at least to those who have seen this video. Let's get to it now.
この番組はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
So if you are an English-speaking Dragon Ball fan in the West, there's a very good chance you've heard Bulma be referred to as Bulma Briefs, or having her refer to Trunks as Trunks Briefs, maybe when you played a video game or something. But no, this is not their last name. This is one of the biggest localization errors that Dragon Ball has ever suffered from. When Toriyama was writing Dragon Ball, the manga, he chose to keep things very simple, and the vast majority of characters in this series do not have last names. And we're going to go through the ones that do and debunk all the ones that don't very, very shortly. But first I want to get to where this misconception came from. So Bulma's dad is known as Burifu Hakase, which translates to Dr. Brief. Not Briefs, Brief, no S at the end. That was his name and always has been his name. But what people have to understand is that in Dragon Ball, because Toriyama made the choice not to give characters last names or surnames for the most part, as a result of that, Brief is in fact his first name. The same thing applies with Dr. Gero or Jiro in the dub, Dr. Miyu. These are all their first names. At some point in the 90s, and I'm not exactly sure when, and I believe I've been able to trace this back to one of the old Dragon Ball Z trading cards, her name was listed as Bulma Briefs over here in the States. But nowhere in any Japanese merchandise or in any interview or in anything in the manga, anime, video games is she ever referred to as Bulma Briefs in Japan. And clearly what happened is that when the series was being translated, whomever translated it assumed that because his name was Dr. Brief, and because of course when you refer to underwear you say briefs, not brief, so they kind of combine those two things. They assumed that, like in the West, it was his last name and thus his daughter's last name. Because over here in the West, when you go see a doctor or when you say Mr. or Mrs., you always say the last name right after. But that's not how it is in the world of Dragon Ball. Now, when it comes to Bulma's mom, her name in the original manga and in the original anime is literally unknown. She is only referred to as Buruma no Haha, which translates to Bulma's mother. She is never given a name anywhere in the series, but in Toriyama's interview for Dragon Ball Forever, he did state that if he were to name her, he would call her Panchi, which is a pun on the word panties. But within the context of the series, her name is unknown. Now, in the Battle of Gods movie pamphlet, they refer to Bulma's mom and dad as brief husband and wife. So this may have created some confusion, but understand that when it comes to pairings, this is very, very common. In fact, in some of the guidebooks, when you see Frieza and King Cold, they refer to them as Frieza or Jaco, which means Frieza family. This does not mean that King Cold's last name is Frieza or Frieza's last name is King Cold. It's just so the audience knows that they are together as a family. Dragon Ball Super kills the idea of Briefs being Bulma's last name when they refer to her in the series as Dr. Bulma, not Dr. Bulma Briefs or Dr. Briefs. Buruma Hakase, which proves once again that in the Dragon Ball world, Doctor and Mr., the word that follows it, is not their last name. Now, when it comes to Goku, he obviously does have a surname, and that is, of course, Son, S-O-N, Son Goku. So if you were to translate his name to the West, it would be Goku-Son, because in Japan, they say last names first. But the reason why Goku has a last name or surname is because he's based on Sun Wukong from Journey to the West. And Goku's family, Son Goku, Son Gohan, Son Goten, are pretty much the only main characters that have surnames. And yes, at the beginning of Dragon Ball Z, we find out that that is indeed an adopted name that his grandfather gave him. Obviously, his birth name is Kakaroto or Kakarot, and that is the only name he's ever given because, much like the Earthlings and other characters, the Saiyans also don't have last names. Now, I know what you're wondering. Well, wait a minute. What about Hercule Satan? What about Videl Satan? What about Tien Shinhan? If you grew up on the English dub, these are probably questions that you have right now. Well, those are also huge misconceptions. First of all, Hercule was the name that was invented by Funimation because of censorship issues. They did not want to refer to the character as Mr. Satan in the censored English dub that would air on television. So for the home release, they combined the name to Hercule Satan, but his name in Japan never was Hercule, ever. In fact, in the French dub, they call him Mr. Savage, which is kind of a cool name in itself. And Videl's last name was never Satan to begin with. In fact, Satan is not even Mr. Satan's last name. Toriyama revealed in the Twin Boo interview that Mr. Satan's name is actually Maku, which is a pun on Akuma, aka devil. Mark is how you pronounce his name in the West. His last name of Satan is not really a last name. When Mark was young, he went to a fighting dojo called Satan Castle, and as a result of him becoming so strong, he was declared champion and was named Mr. Satan. That is not his last name. His only name is Mark, and his daughter's name is Videl. Again, she does not have a last name. In fact, in the series itself, she makes reference to this. Early on in the Majin Buu arc, when she first meets Gohan, she realizes that Son Goku is Gohan's dad and states in the manga that not many people have family names these days. So right then and there, the series itself is telling you what I'm trying to tell you. Now, what about Tien Shinhan? Another mistranslation. His name in the original manga and original anime was never Tien and then Shinhan, his last name. It is Ten Shinhan, one word. And I presume the reason for this is because when they were dubbing it, it was just easier to say Tien and have it fit with mouth flaps and always say Ten Shinhan. Plus, maybe they thought that kids had trouble pronouncing it. I couldn't tell you. This was done back in 1996. Also, people have talked about Vegeta having a last name, Bray. That was never said anywhere in any dub, and I already debunked that on a previous video back in the day. I'll link to that at the end of this one. So, one of the explanations as to why this is the case in the world of Dragon Ball is given to us in the Jaco the Galactic Patrolman manga, which really introduces some interesting new concepts to the Dragon Ball world, namely the fact that there are certain regions in the world that do have last names. In fact, almost every character in Jaco has a last name, with the exception of Tights, Bulma's sister. And Omori himself in the manga says when he hears Tights' name, that it sounds a bit Western. So it's possible that certain regions in the Dragon Ball world do have last names. Jaco himself has a last name, Teiri Menten Piboshi. And then there's Anazuki, Omori Tokunoshin, Tamagoro Katayude, and Daigoro Kurigashira. These are all last names in Jaco, and the world of Jaco is part of the Dragon Ball world. Now, another one that comes up a lot is Dr. Slump. Now, when it comes to Dr. Slump, understand that the Dr. Slump characters were created before Toriyama had created Dragon Ball, and then as he was writing Dragon Ball, he decided to make a crossover, but as a result of that, the names from the original manga of Dr. Slump were carried over into Dragon Ball, which is why Senbei Norimaki, Arale Norimaki, Midori Yamabuki, pretty much almost every character in Slump does have a last name. And the reason why Toriyama chose to go with that's because he wanted Slump to be more of a Western manga, even though Slump is actually set in Japan, whereas Dragon Ball has its own sort of fantasy world. I was debating whether or not to mention the Slump characters because they are from another manga originally, but I feel like I had to do it because if I didn't, somebody would be asking about it. So just there you go. So you're probably wondering, okay, are there any other characters in the Dragon Ball world that have last names? Well, the gods, the angels, the Supreme Kais, these characters just don't have actual last names. Sometimes they have suffixes like Kaio-sama, which means like Lord of Worlds, or Kami-sama, which means Lord God, but Lord is not a name, it's just like a title, you know what I mean? That doesn't count. We're talking about actual like last names. There's a small handful of characters that do. Remember the actor Barry Kahn from the Dragon Ball Super episodes where they were making the Great Saiyan Man movie? Or the other actress in those episodes, Koko Amaguri? Both of those characters have last names. Also, Mercenary Tao in the Japanese version, Tao Pai Pai. That one is a bit of a gray area because it's a pun on Peach White White, so it could just be just a punny kind of fun name, and it's difficult to say whether or not Pai Pai is his last name because the only time he's referred to as Pai Pai is once by Ten Shin Han, but understand that the word Pai Pai is Japanese slang for breast, so it could be another one of those Toriyama jokes that usually gets lost in translation. Now understand this information all comes from the original Japanese sources and expert Japanese interpreters, so if you're going to sit here and question any of this, you can take that elsewhere because I'm speaking to N1 certified interpreters with all the information in this video to make sure it's all accurate. And I know it can be confusing because it's a different language and a different culture. Hopefully we've explained it pretty good. So here's some obscure characters that do have last names. The tutor from Dragon Ball Z episode 118 that Chi-Chi hired to help Gohan with his studies, Shu Sayako. He's got a last name. Also, remember the Cash family from Dragon Ball Z movie 9, the BoJack film? Well, the Cash family in the Japanese version are known as the Dollar family, and they also have last names. And let's not forget, of course, the Para brothers from Dragon Ball GT, but these three examples are not in the original manga. They are anime-only individuals. So that's pretty much it. I can't think of anybody else. To reiterate, the majority of Dragon Ball characters do not have last names, no matter what you may have seen in the localizations, in the dubs. Bulma's last name is not Briefs. Dr. Briefs is his first name, and that's the way that it is. And now this myth has been debunked. Thank you for checking out the video. If you're new, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of every upload I put out. That way you know when stuff is coming. I thank you so much. Spread the word about this video. Let's clean up the misinformation in the fandom and the mistranslations. I will talk to y'all very soon.